So it is my pleasure to introduce to you today the chair of the ACS Board of Directors, Professor Peter Edelman. Professor Edelman is a longtime champion for the rights of those who most need our protection, our children, our poor, and our homeless. Early in his career, Professor Edelman served as a legislative assistant to Senator Robert Kennedy. Since then, Professor Edelman, through his work in the community and his work with students, has reflected Robert Kennedy's famous words, "If one man's rights are denied, the rights of all others are endangered." Professor Edelman's long list of accomplishments, which you can read about in the program, include serving as Issues Director for Senator Edward Kennedy's 1980 presidential campaign, as Counsel to Health and Human Services Secretary Donna Shalala, Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, and as a law clerk to Second Circuit Judge Henry Friendly and Supreme Court Justice Arthur J. Goldberg. Currently, Professor Edelman serves as Faculty Director for the Center on Poverty, Inequality, and Public Policy at Georgetown University Law, and recently published his new book, So Rich, So Poor, Why It's So Hard to End Poverty in America. I give you Professor Edelman.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's just fabulous. I had a chance to tell some of you yesterday afternoon how exciting it is to see you all here. Let me tell you all that, except those who are out in the sun. I'm not excited about them. This is a panel which in the work of the People's Act and others who put together this terrific program absolutely follows on what you just heard, particularly with Jim Brosnahan having talked about civil Gideon. We're going to talk this morning about beyond legal aid. You can't talk about beyond legal aid without saying a word about legal services, legal aid itself, which I want to do for just a minute or so before I have a few more remarks that are only going to be a couple minutes about what we're going to do here in this panel. But we do need to have a frame here that before we get to the exciting things that this panel, each of them differently and in very differing ways are doing about bringing justice for more people in this country, we need to understand that the baseline is the need for representation of everybody on the civil side who needs a lawyer. And Jim Brosnahan certainly laid that out. You all know it. We have a pro se self-representation crisis in our courts, certainly in every major city, but really around the country. The numbers that you heard were actually an understatement. I chair the Access to Justice Commission in the District of Columbia, and I'm really immersed in this on a very regular day-to-day basis. In Washington, D.C., and it's not unusual around the country, in landlord-tenant court, something on the order of 95% of the defended tenants are not represented by counsel. The same in debt collection, the same in every high-volume part of our trial court. And so that's the first challenge, and we've already heard about it, we know about it. There's certainly more that we can say about it. The complexity of how, as a realistic matter, we move toward getting full representation in the most urgent places is a very difficult, important, critical question. It's going to require not just people who work full-time, and we need more of them, we need better funding for them, but we need the pro bono involvement of lawyers in private practice in a very, very multiplied way beyond what we have right now. In laying the groundwork for what we're about to talk about, we need to understand a little bit about the evolution of legal services since the 1960s. In some ways, we've come sort of full circle. When in the heyday, in the beginning of neighborhood legal services, which to begin with were largely financed by, when we began in the 60s, largely financed by federal money. Of course, there was a long history of legal aid in major cities where they were very small, but were financed by private charity, and we still have that, and there's actually a lot more private money now. But as most of you know, in the 60s, the new federally financed legal services lawyers sued the heck out of everybody in sight. Not just because they had the fervor of the 60s behind them, but also because the courts in the age of the Warren Court and largely judges who had been appointed at least at the federal level, but even state by state, had perhaps a more responsive bent to them than is true now. And so whether it was the farm worker litigation, which of course is so much in the history and in the present of California, but all kinds of structural litigation in so many directions. That's changed. We still have fabulous organizations, and we have East Bay represented here in terms of kind of, shall we say, well, one of the best examples of legal services around the country doing so many different things. And I was at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia the other day. They're out there. But because of what's happened to the funding in relation to the need, what's happened on those who get federal money, the restrictions, and in small states, that's all there is. In states with no big cities, that's all there is the federally financed. The restrictions on class actions and the rest are important in a very negative way. The judiciary is not so responsive. It varies from state to state, but not so much. So if you take a kind of a picture of the whole country, there's a lot, proportionately more one-on-one representation. All to the good in terms of the maximization of one-on-one representation, not so good when it comes to the other things that ought to be going on. So we want to talk here about the ways in which, and that's why we're talking about beyond legal aid, the ways in which there are people either going back to the evolution and the tradition that comes from the 1960s, or new ideas that have come along, and much of what you'll be hearing about really are new things. Because we tended to have, our idea back at the beginning was, there's something wrong, sue somebody. Bring a piece of structural impact litigation, class action, whether it's based on the Constitution, United States Constitution, more friendly in those days than now, sue somebody. We've come to understand, and we all wish we had the capacity to do it more, that the roles for lawyers in relation to low-income people and the strategies to use to press for structural change have to include, they still include litigation, but have to turn in other directions. Changing policies, going to the legislature, going to the executive branch of the unit of government, going to the city council, whatever it is, and working out in the community in partnership with people who are out there in the neighborhoods and who are low-income people themselves, organizing, being partners with them. We need to be doing all of those things. So as we look forward, we certainly need more dollars for all of this. We need more pro bono help with all of this. If you're here in the Bay Area, I'm willing to bet that you're a little more used to being able to go to some of the law firms as partners. That's true for us in Washington, D.C. That's certainly not true in large parts of our country. So we want to talk today about what happens when you use a little more imagination, where there's a sense of innovation, where there are things going on that are different from what those great lawyers, the Gary Bellows of the 1960s and the others. So that's what I want to say in setting up things. You have the bios, but let me say briefly, Rosa Bay, I'm saying them in alphabetical order, and I'm going to do that with the first question as well, is a staff attorney and clinical instructor, and she's at the East Bay Community Law Center. And so we're not going in order. Raise your hand. They'll know you soon. Camille Pannu is an Equal Justice Works Fellow now and is a staff attorney at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Colin Parent is the policy director of the San Diego Housing Commission. And Marc Philpart is a senior program associate at Policy Link. And notice the, shall we say, the age composition of this panel, other than myself. It is, I think all four of them add up to less than how old I am. And that's great. Not to make me older than I am, but you get where I'm going. So I think the first thing that would be really helpful for all of us in the room before we get to the personal work and what you're each doing personally, is for all of you to understand what these four organizations are. A couple of them, East Bay and San Diego, sound like you know what they are. But in fact, there are things about them that you don't know because they are at the cutting edge of the organizations of their genre. And many of you don't know Policy Link and the Sustainable Economies Law Center. They may be new to you completely. So, Rosa, would you start by telling us about the East Bay Community Law Center?
Sure, thanks, Peter. So I am here from the East Bay Community Law Center, or EBCLC as we like to call it. EBCLC is a very unique organization. We are a high volume provider of civil legal services, and we are also a clinic of Berkeley Law School, or BOLT. We were founded by a group of Berkeley Law students in the late 80s, and back in the day when it first was up and running, we didn't have practice areas. It was a couple of attorneys and a handful of students, and they were doing housing, law, eviction defense, and they were doing some welfare work. Now we're approaching our 25th anniversary, which is really kind of hard to believe, and we have grown exponentially. We now have 9 practice areas, which is just amazing. We do housing, we have a housing practice, immigration, welfare, we have a clean slate practice, we have a health practice with a medical legal partnership. We have the Youth Defender Clinic, which is one of our newest additions. So now we are doing, actually, beyond civil legal services, we're doing a bit of criminal defense work with youth. We have a policy clinic. We have a consumer clinic, or a low threshold clinic that serves a lot of the homeless in the Bay Area. And we have Green Collar Communities Clinic. It's called GC3. So again, it's hard to fathom how much growth we've seen in just a very short span of time, actually, in the grand scheme of things. We have now become the largest provider of free legal services in the East Bay. And again, we pride ourselves on our mission, which is that we're trying to provide justice through education and advocacy. So the twin-pronged approach of providing free legal services while also providing clinical education for our future lawyers.
Terrific. Let me just clarify for sure, you don't get any federal LSC money.
No. No, which is why we
because
can.
there are things you're doing that you wouldn't be able to do.
Most of my clients, yeah, I wouldn't be able to be sued.
And how are you financed beyond the law?
Oh Lord, there's a pie chart. It's
So, foundations.
Berkeley Law, foundations, which is part of my fund, law firms, private donors. We do get some government funding, so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's some government is state and some of it's federal under other programs?
Yes.
Okay, so just so people understand that as well.
But fundraising is obviously, it's a big piece. We have a whole, we have several staff devoted to grant writing and looking for other sources of funding for us.
Do you think of yourself, this isn't a question that this might or not work, that there are peers across the country, peer organizations similar?
Yeah, or even in the Bay Area, in terms of that provide clinical education.
Well, not that. That's very
high volume. I think that's where it gets trickier. I go to a lot of clinical conferences every year. We have one nationwide, and there are very few, if any, that I can think of that provide clinical legal education and also do the high volume, free, legal services.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move on to Camille and. Wonderful that EJW has recognized you to be a fellow.
Thank you. So I work at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, which is a nonprofit organization housed in Oakland. I am their Fresno office, for those of you from California, so I'm a country and rural lawyer. And their focus is on creating community resilience and transformation by sharing resources. So their focus is on finding ways for people to become more sustainable without following the traditional pathways out of poverty or the traditional approaches to poverty alleviation or elimination. And they do it primarily through education of the public, direct education for lawyers so that they can provide the level of transactional services required to help people work on community economic development issues. And then they also do some policy work and a little bit of direct representation. My project is a little different because I'm an Equal Justice Works Fellow, so for those of you who are aspiring public interest warriors, totally apply for fellowships, it's worth it. They basically have you design your dream job and then give you money to do it for 2 years. And so my dream job was to work with rural farm worker communities.
Now, we want to get to your individual thing in the next round.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm going to wrap it just as an example of the work that the Sustainable Economies Law Center does. So I'm based out in their rural practice, and so a lot of the work there is with direct clients as well. I should just limit it at that instead of the details. And so I work with about 12 clients across 4 counties in the southern San Joaquin Valley, which is kind of the big agricultural belt for California.
Say what a success would be like for the overall organization in terms of this concept of sustainable economies.
Sure. So I think a really clear success is when you see, so we try to work particularly with very low income communities and communities that are historically underinvested or divested from. And so a win for us is when community leaders have enough capacity to identify what they want to do and are able to do it. And that our role in that is to help facilitate the process and cut the red tape for them. So we've launched a couple of worker cooperatives. I think that's a clear example of what we see as a win. We've passed a couple of laws. Those are things that we see as wins.
What are those?
We passed the Cottage Food Act law last year. It's called the California Homemade Food Act, which decreases the number of barriers for people who are home entrepreneurs and food businesses. And we're probably coming up with a worker cooperative law in the next 2 years that you might see. Because I guess the major difference in cooperatives as opposed to regular commerce is that the workers are both the owners and the workers, whereas almost everything in economic development is oriented around a management labor kind of dynamic. And so the law doesn't really have space at the moment for contemplating other structures.
Colin, what are you doing here?
A question I ask myself frequently in a number of circumstances. Thank you.
No problem.
So I'm the policy director at the San Diego Housing Commission. This is I think the end of my second full week at the commission recently.
What is your greatest success so far?
That's right. Making it up here. And I was asked to serve on this panel during my last job, which was I was the Director for External Affairs at the Department of Housing and Community Development in Sacramento, so I worked in the Jerry Brown administration. And so now I do a somewhat similar job.
Well, didn't you have to get another job? Didn't he cut those things out?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm a victim of austerity in California. No, I left on my own accord.
But this is a preview of sequestration, right?
Sure. So
that's why we asked
anyway,
you
it
to
was
come
great to be
here.
here, guys. So the Housing Commission, as many people might intuit, is the public housing authority for the city of San Diego. It is also effectively the housing department for the city of San Diego. It's a pretty unique institution among housing authorities in the United States, where it sort of fulfills both of those functions as well as a number of others. It's a government agency. I'm a government employee, as I was before. And what we do is definitely, it's not legal services. It's very different. But we are still in the business of providing for very fundamental human needs, in particular shelter and housing. And this is, I think part of my role here on this panel is to talk about that other element of what society can and should do to help the poor, and those things are like their food, shelter, healthcare, among other things, and what we do for affordable housing, it's not about, and for comparable programs, it's not about justice ensured by the courts, but rather justice ensured through the political process by public policy outcomes that benefit the poor and underrepresented. So, we'll talk a little bit about sort of what affordable housing is and how it relates to this conversation. First of all, there is no Gideon for affordable housing. You don't have a constitutional, or for housing, you don't have a constitutional right to live in decent housing.
There was a case once, right? And the Supreme Court said no.
Right. Well, there's been all sorts of other. I'm not a fair housing expert. I'm going to be. But there's been a lot of there's a lot of litigation about this. And yeah, basically, it's you don't have a lot of rights related to housing. You have some. There's some. But they don't rise to a constitutional level in most circumstances. But what's unique about affordable housing, or maybe not unique, but what's particular about affordable housing is that there are not even like basic standards. Like if for food stamps, to be eligible for food stamps, you have to have this sort of income, and then you get eligible for food stamps, and the government gives you food stamps. Or if you're, in order to get unemployment, you have to have been employed, and then you're unemployed, and now you're eligible, and you get some benefits. It's not the way it works for affordable housing. There's once you make if you have a certain income level, you become eligible to apply for affordable housing, but whether or not you receive those benefits are dependent on the availability. Mm-hmm. And so because there are a finite number of units that are available for affordable housing, or a finite number of affordable housing Section 8 vouchers. And so I think this is a universe of limitations that is very, very important to understanding how providing this benefit operates. And in San Diego, for instance, where I'm from, about a quarter of income-eligible individuals receive some sort of affordable housing benefit, not just from the Commission, but from all affordable housing.
And that's the national number, by the way, about 1 in 4.
Yeah. And I just want to say just a note about what affordable housing is and how it specifically functions, because I think a lot of people, they think, oh, affordable housing, that's great. It's government runs some buildings and people get to live in them, and well, okay, that's a piece of it, but it's a little more complicated than that. So what we do at the Commission is we build and operate affordable housing buildings, and we do a bunch of other more innovative things that maybe we can talk about too. But the way this works is just like an ordinary developer. Developer, they say, I'm going to build a building. It's going to have 100 units. I'm going to be able to collect this much rent. This is going to be my revenue, and these are the costs associated with building and operating that building. That's like constructing it, paying off debt service, maintaining it. The difference between affordable housing and market rate is that the revenues are capped at a certain amount, there's usually instead of that property and that generating income that can be enjoyed by the developer, there's actually a gap. There's not enough money based on revenue in order to pay for all those things. And so there's a gap. And so what public policy has to do is has to fill in that gap in some fashion. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. California recently got rid of redevelopment. My old boss was very successful in his policy agenda on that, and that was a major funder of that gap. And the federal government has a number of programs that fill that gap. We don't have to get into them. And the city of San Diego, as well as other localities, have other financing mechanisms that can fill in that gap. And so what the commission has to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about sort of my specific role in that later, is we have to find ways to fill in that gap so that we can expand the universe of affordable housing, and also to maintain what we have there. So it's a challenge. And then the one other thing that I want to sort of put out there, and we can talk about more of that in a little bit later, is that the other big difference between affordable housing and other things, besides just the scarcity of it, is also there's nothing uniform about it. Once you apply for affordable housing, you get to live in a specific place usually, and those places are not necessarily the same as comparable places, even right across the street, even run by the same organization. And that's because as the law students who've gone through a real estate course or a property course understand, like, all property is unique. And that is complicated. And so instead of building you don't just build like the same affordable housing building doesn't go here, it is also not going to go here. Like it's a totally different building, totally financed a different way. It's going to look different. It's going to be constrained by all these things. And so I think that really affects what one needs to do in order to achieve public policy outcomes in this universe.
Good. Thanks for getting us started. Well, Marc, as you know, I know a lot about policy links, so therefore I know that there's the 1 hour, the 2 hour, the 2-day version. Fabulous organization. I think you said when we talked on the phone that it's an intermediary advocate for equity.
Yes.
Unpack that.
I will. Good morning, everyone. I thought I would get something of a response after everyone's had coffee, so I thought folks would be a little bit more peppy. Yeah. But
they're into it.
You're into it? Okay. All right. Don't judge a book by its cover. So PolicyLink is an applied research and action institute. We've been around for about 15 years now. And as Mr. Edelman said, we're an intermediary. And what that means is we don't provide services in a traditional sense. So we don't necessarily work with people on the ground and do direct service, but we do work with organizations that might be service providers. We have a host of different partners that we end up working with to inform and influence policy. We believe in advancing equity, and how we define it, equity is a just and fair society where all can participate and prosper. And so we talk about this notion of equity in the sense that all folks have the opportunity to participate in our democracy, all folks have the opportunity to participate in our economy, and all folks have a right to education and things of that nature. So we really are an all-inclusive organization, but we focus on folks who are normally left behind, because that's where we feel we need to emphasize action, from a policy perspective. So most of what we do is advance policy that improves outcomes for low-income people and people of color throughout the country across a host of different issue areas, whether those are health, education, wealth, employment, community economic development, or regional planning. We're involved in a number of different spaces in order to achieve that outcome. And I'll just say one quick word about how we do that, and then turn it back over to Mr. Edelman. What we do, I think, requires a number of different skill sets. A lot of it is kind of focused on this idea of policy advocacy, where we talk about identifying an issue, drawing attention to the issue, and working towards a solution. but that really requires us to be intentional about what we want, what we want for what population. We have to be informed, so we do a lot of research in order to make sure we're as sharp as we can be as it relates to a particular issue. And then we're inclusive, so we're bringing partners to the table, some of which are non-traditional allies who you might not normally think about working with in order to further an outcome. And then we're specific. So what we often find is that government in many ways can't call out race and gender, but the other sort of sectors and industries and individuals who are working on behalf of those communities can, right? So we often find that it's important to name the folks that we want to have an impact on behalf of, and to bring them into the conversation in a real way, so that not only are we speaking on behalf of them, but they're at the table with us. So we have a real sort of civic engagement component to our work that empowers people who we believe need to be able to inform policy and different systems. And lastly, I would say it requires us to be organized. So there are several of us on staff who are organizers or have been organizers, and we don't organize in the community in the same way that a community organizer would, but we organize organizations, we organize other entities so that we can build a shared sense for what a priority should be for a particular issue. So we are doing a number of different things on multiple fronts. And I would say that the legal training that you all have, while different from what you would do at an organization like PolicyLink, can be very useful in that context. And so as you think about your career path and what you want to do, I would say that there are definitely opportunities at organizations like mine. Even though we don't practice law, those skill sets are very valuable.
I'm glad you said that. I think that's very, very important. Angela Glover Blackwell, who's the founder and CEO of PolicyLink, is the evolution of her career is exactly what you're talking about. She was a legal services lawyer, and she went on to be a foundation executive. But it's an absolute trajectory that makes sense. It's totally logical. So thanks for underlining that, Mark. We had, I might just say, the other day in our faculty, we were having a meeting about what's happening, and you all know the sort of difficulty that's out there, because some of you kind of living it in terms of what you're going to do next in this market. And somebody on the faculty was talking about the number of our graduates who are getting jobs that don't require a law degree. And there was this sort of tone in the office that, gee, they're probably working in a fast food place. And so I was very grateful that one of my colleagues raised her hand and said, wait a minute, let's talk about what those jobs are. And in large part, they're what Mark talked about, they're what Colin talked about, because he is a lawyer, but he doesn't have to be a lawyer to do what he does. And certainly, I think one of the great sort of challenges that we have in legal education is to say that policy advocacy is one of the totally appropriate uses of a law degree. So you got me going, and thank you for that. I want to start back with, we'll just come down, well, I'm going to go to Camille and Rosa first, because both of you are doing things that you call, and that others would call, community lawyering. And so I think we need to know what that is, but specifically around what now we're back to what you're doing.
Great. So to tell you a little bit about what I do, I have to tell you about where I work. So I work in the San Joaquin Valley. So for those who commute from the Bay Area to Los Angeles, that's I-5 and Highway 99. And it will ultimately be where the high-speed rail goes if you ever take it and if it's ever built. So
it's the other way around. If it's ever built, then you can take it.
Yeah, then you can take it. So I'm in a part of the state that I think is largely forgotten and that is uniquely, culturally, and politically extraordinarily different from the coast. It's politically very right-wing. It's a lot like living in the South. But it's entirely diverse. So over 50% of the residents of the valley are of color. A great deal of them are Latino. And their population is growing at 6 times the rate of the rest of the state, which is pretty intense. So for example, one of my clients went from being a community of 100 homes to being 550 people in 5 years, which is insane. So that kind of growth also poses extreme burdens on infrastructure that just doesn't exist. So rural people and rural cities and rural communities do not get the same level of funding, the same level of resources, and it often doesn't go into the same places as it does in the urban context. And I come from a very low-income urban community, and that was where my heart was when I went to law school. And then I came out of it being like, I'm going to live in the country forever. I only want to work in rural communities, in part because the access to justice gap is so severe. So my region has been noted as the poorest in the nation, according to the Congressional Research Service. It outpaces Greater Appalachia for just overall poverty. It's extraordinarily environmentally unhealthy, and if you are a Latino farm worker, you will likely die 20 years earlier than a white farmer who lives in the same region. So I think that's important to understand because the valley is, sorry, I know there's lots of valleys in the world and in California. I don't mean San Fernando. So in the San Joaquin Valley, you know, the other aspect of the system is that it relies on what I would describe as a feudal, racialized economy of farm work. And that racialized economy is extraordinarily extractive. So I think many times we see fields and we're like, oh, that's so pretty, that must be so healthy. And industrial agriculture, there's really nothing pretty about it. There's nothing safe or healthy about it, I'm sure. And most people will get really mad if they hear me say that in the Valley, but I've said it before. And so my job there is mostly trying to help people figure out alternatives to the current system of just devastating resources and sacrificing the health of young people and of low-income people in the pursuit of quote-unquote jobs. And I say quote-unquote because most of these jobs lack dignity, are not paid minimum wage, often result in high levels of death, are extremely dangerous, and even if the laws on the books are extremely protective, as they are in California, California has some of the best farm worker labor protections, they're completely unenforced. And if you take it to court locally, it's going to get thrown out because the people who fund the retention elections for local state courts are the same people who own all the farms where those folks work, or the dairies, or the processing rendering plant, or the massive prisons, or the massive waste dumps. So, you know, all your waste here in the Bay Area and Los Angeles comes to the Valley. So this is a community of people who are often talked about as if they're dumb, treated as if they're the dumping ground of the state, and then are also not necessarily super likable because they also vote so polarly differently than the rest of the state, and culturally they're very Southern, and there's an actual history of Southern migration to the Valley that justifies and explains that. So my job is working with these very limited resource, very desperately poor rural communities to help them figure out an alternative to a mega dairy or a prison moving in. So I started at an environmental justice organization called the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. They're based here in the Bay Area, but also down in Delano, California. And they believe in what Jennifer Gordon calls law in the service of organizing. So this is the notion that the lawyer is not the protagonist, the lawsuit is not the goal. The goal is to change power relations and power dynamics fundamentally between those who are excluded from power opportunities and those who have access to power. And so what that means for me practically is that, you know, there's a lot of kind of catchy ways to describe it, but one of the ways to describe it is the lawyer is on tap, not on top. So I don't drive the decisions that my communities make. My job is to partner with a community organizer who has been there, who has worked there. It's to defer to the organizer. It's to defer to opportunities to build power in the communities that I work with. So a clear example of that is when we go to testify at local government. I often don't testify. I prep the folks who go and testify, or I help them translate or just feel more comfortable. And in general, most of my clients want nothing to do with government at all. They've never had a positive experience, or they're terribly afraid, or they're undocumented and they all have good reasons for not wanting to interact with their local governments. So that's kind of the framework of the work I do. Very practically, I'm a community economic development lawyer, which is rare in legal services, and I would say kind of strange in general. There's not a lot of us. So right now, over 1 million people in my service area qualify for just my services. And that's overwhelming sometimes as an attorney, and it's because I'm the only one who works with low-income people who can't pay me. If you go and look at the same transactional lawyers on the business side, they make tons of money. I find it like just shocking. We call it greasing the wheels of big business, and Walmart and all these farms, and that's great. But I really do think, personally speaking, I don't think we can get out of the economic injustice that exists in this country without fundamentally changing how our economy works. And right now, our economy works by subsidizing the very rich, by ripping away literally the lives, the health, and the well-being of working people. And so in order to switch that, it's not that I think you punish those who are in positions of power. I think we reframe what we measure as success. We reframe how people are making a living and what we count. Right now we count how much stuff we use. That's our growth every year, which I think is ridiculous. I'd rather measure how healthy people are, or how literate they are, or how happy they are. And so I help folks create those enterprises locally. So I'm helping them do local economic development in a region where they feel like they have historically been told that there's too stupid or lack the formal education to do anything other than traditional farm work. And I say this also, I need to put a caveat on it. I actually think farm work is amazing, and I think to grow food for people and nourish the world is phenomenal. So I don't want my statement to be seen as a denigration of that work. But I do think that if you are a farm worker who owns the farm you work on, that's a lot more transformational than being a farm worker who is at the whim of a labor contractor who is protected from actually following the law in any way, shape, or form. So I don't do litigation, but I still work on all these topics that feed into litigation. Thank you. My takeaway is come move to the country, but I'll get back to that later.
Okay, better. We're getting warmed up, right, everybody? Okay, Rosa,
So-
more community lawyering.
Right, and Peter, at some point we are talking about our backgrounds, sort of where we come from, how we got here.
Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause
Well,
Camille and I,
Camille
it
did a
turns
little
out-
bit. You want to? We'll come back to that
Yeah,
part
I talked
too.
a lot.
Yeah.
No, it turns out, I come from the San Joaquin Valley where Camille
Okay,
is doing
well-
all this work, and there is this
Rosa's
amazing...
from a community I represent, which I
Right.
thought was awesome.
Right.
Just
But
start
no,
there.
I'm going to
that's
talk
good.
about what I do. No, I'm going to talk about what I do now.
Yeah.
And which is, I go to middle school. I carry a backpack and I go to middle school every day. That's what I get to do for a job. And I'm not much taller than any of the sixth graders. I practically get mowed down in the hallway every day. But that's what I get to do. I am an attorney in the health practice at EBCLC, but I came on board in the fall of 2010 to launch school-based clinics in Oakland. So I go to these 5 middle schools. 4 of them are in East Oakland and 1 is in West Oakland. It's part of this national initiative called Elevate, where you're providing wraparound services at these very high-need schools. And it's just been absolutely fantastic. We provide direct legal services to students and their families. These services are free. All of the students that go to these schools are low income and qualify for our services. We also do a lot of community education. So I do several times a semester, I do workshops for parents and students on topics of interest to them. I really didn't know what to expect when I first started going to school, like what kinds of legal issues I was going to be seeing. The way the project was sort of framed was that the focus was going to be on youth law writ large. But what I started realizing very early on, I did sort of like a 6-month evaluation of what we were seeing in school, was that the #1 legal need that was coming through the door was immigration. By and large, it was like 60% of the cases that we were seeing were related to immigration. Second was housing, third was welfare. And so in the first 2 years of the project, this is our 3rd school year being there on campus. And the first couple of years, I focused a lot actually on immigration law, and that was sort of my background actually. But we're starting to shift the focus more towards education law. That doesn't mean that we're not addressing these other issues, immigration, housing. As I said before, EBCLC is now grown to 9 practice areas, so what that means for our clients is that they have access to all of these lawyers, to all of these practice areas. So oftentimes I'm the conduit who is then referring families to these other services. We think of the services that we offer at EBCLC as holistic, civil services, and now actually, criminal as well. I've never seen a family come in the door with just one legal issue. Families living in poverty don't just have one issue. There's a host of things going on, immigration issues that affect their eligibility to get Section 8 vouchers, and housing, and they're all intricately interrelated, and so we can't just narrowly focus on any one thing. What I've been doing this last school year and focusing my work on is providing representation in special education and school discipline, which is a huge area of need, but one where we've been doing more outreach, because I think a lot of families don't necessarily identify this as a legal issue, but really it is. The school to prison pipeline, which I'm sure Marc is going to be talking some about, is alive and well in Oakland. In Oakland Unified School District, we are sending an inordinate number of kids to the juvenile justice system from school, from things that happened at school. And we're talking about kids of color too. I guess maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but when I first walked on those campuses, there's not one single white child that attends any of these schools that I'm at in Oakland. And there's something really wrong with that. But these are the kids that we're sending directly into the juvenile justice system as well. So we're trying to intervene and do some preventative work and trying to advocate so these kids get their special education needs met. If you go to juvenile hall and you see these kids, most of them have IEPs. That means they're in special education, but they haven't been getting the services that they need, which means that they're totally, they've lost interest in what's going on in the classroom because they don't understand what's going on there. They're totally disengaged, and they found more success and more acceptance out on the streets, outside of school. And really they're being pushed out a lot of times by their schools. I represent kids that are just being suspended constantly, where exclusionary discipline practices are the only means that teachers and administrators have to address behavior issues in the classroom. And so we're really focusing in on that issue. And now with the launching of the Youth Defender Clinic, with my colleague Kate Weisberg, I'm partnering with her on representation of kids that are now in the juvenile delinquency system, working on their education issues, and Kate represents them in their delinquency case. And so it's been absolutely fantastic to be able to partner in that way. I also take clients, some clients, not just from the schools, but from our through our medical legal partnership. We've partnered with Children's Hospital Oakland, and so I take quite a few special education cases that are coming out of the hospital as well. But in a nutshell, that's what I do. I go to school, and I absolutely love it, but we have so much work to do. It can be absolutely overwhelming at times, but it's totally amazing, and the law students love it. So if you have the opportunity to ever work at EBCLC, or during the summer we take students from all over the country, it's a very unique opportunity to be in schools doing this work.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Rosa. So we'll have a chance to come back, and maybe we came into the film in the middle, and so we'll get back to the San Joaquin Valley sure. and so on. But Marc, let's turn to the lens to what you yourself are doing with Policy Link.
Absolutely. Just hearing Rosa talk about her work, it spurred a lot of things in my mind that I'd like to share. Hopefully at some point, I don't know how much back and forth we can have between the two of us, but there are so many different connections. A lot of the work that I do at PolicyLink is focused on building and supporting networks, and usually these networks are focused on policy and systems change. So right now I'm working closely with a family of organizations throughout the state that have come together to form an alliance for boys and men of color. And so the goal there is to improve outcomes for that population throughout the state. And we started primarily working in 3 different places in Oakland, Fresno, and Los Angeles last year. and really starting to try and galvanize different local campaigns in those places, and then work at the state level to influence and inform policy, working in partnership with an Assembly Select Committee, which was established by this name. And this was the first Assembly Select Committee in the history of the state legislature by this particular name on this topic, if you will. And so it was a really groundbreaking experience for us last year in terms of the impact we were able to have and the attention we were able to draw to the issue. We organized different local campaigns, but also moved policy at the state level by getting those local campaigns to participate in the state legislative process. A lot of what we have identified in terms of issues for this population are sort of the run-of-the-mill things that you might expect in health and education, in employment. Across the board, we found that boys and men of color were behind, were not as successful, were more disproportionately represented in all of the negative institutions that you might think about in terms of the justice system. And things of that nature, and then overall just had a negative image in the media, and so we really felt that this initiative was necessary in order to one, change the trajectory of these folks, right, but to also allow them to be the leaders that we know them to be, and in terms of taking their own fate into their hands and sort of changing their outcomes for the better, and so. We, with the support of the California Endowment and several other partners throughout the state, we had tremendous success last year. We partnered with a Fixed School Discipline Coalition to advance 7 bills through the legislature. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the California State Legislature, but it's one of the biggest state legislatures in the country. I mean, we have about 120 members. I think we're probably only surpassed by Texas, which has like 150. But to get...
I'll tell you about New Hampshire in a while.
New Hampshire, but to get the number of bills passed that we did, I think was a real success and a statement, I think, to the state in terms of saying, you know, that these folks are supportive of changing the trajectory of this population. And so, as Rosa talked about, you know, the school to prison pipeline issue is a huge one for us. And so we focused pretty heavily on school discipline. One of the things that we were able to do is partner with the Fixed School Discipline Coalition. And as I said, we passed 5 different bills, and those were signed into law by your former boss, Colin, Governor Brown. And this year we're revving up to do the same thing, if not, you know, surpass that. And so the priorities have expanded in terms of our work. We're not only looking at education this time around, but we're also looking at employment and justice related issues, as well as health. And so really trying to make inroads in all of those different areas and improve outcomes for this particular population.
Terrific. Colin, now on you as opposed to the organization.
Yeah, so I'm going to sort of try to, I think I'm going to talk about a little bit of both of my last job and my current job, because I think I think I'm responsible for basically the same sort of role, and that's effectively to sort of identify policy opportunities within government, and then also to execute on those opportunities. Mm-hmm. So when I was a political appointee from Governor Brown, I did, you know, the title is External Affairs. It's sort of a nonsense title. It doesn't really have a specific portfolio, but it was, you know, it was really to be the governor's guy in that department to look out for his interests, and which is actually a wonderful thing, because most people in government have a specific program or responsibility they're responsible for. They don't have the bandwidth or the license to go sort of explore and to think about how things could be better, or think about what other opportunities there are to advance advance good public policy, and also to advance sometimes the political interests of their principals. So I mean the principal, I mean like the governor, that principle. So my big project there was reforming the state enterprise zone program, the details of which I'm not going to go super deep on, but $700 million program. It's supposed to be for economic development. No real study has shown that it's actually effective at that at all. So it's basically just $700 million spent giving it in the pocket of certain businesses. And so my job there was to say, okay, so this is no good. The governor wanted to get rid of this program in his 2011 budget. The legislature wouldn't let him do it, and so they asked us, okay, so what do you do with it? And so I looked at it, and it looked like my admin class in my 1L year. Like, oh, well, there's a statute. We have a bunch of regulations that interpret the statute. Why don't we just rewrite the regulations and make this program cost less money and make it easier to provide benefits for employers who hire veterans and recipients of public assistance? Let's just do that. And so I spent basically a year and a half rewriting regulations that were published just about a month ago. If you Google enterprise zones, you'll see an article written about every other day about them because we made this thing happen. And this is an example of why being a lawyer in this sort of situation is incredibly useful, because you don't have to be a lawyer to write regulations, but you may have to be a lawyer to understand that the regulatory process provides the executive an enormous amount of authority and discretion if they can find ambiguity in statutes. And so my job there was to identify this as an opportunity, and then to do the hard work of writing regulations and executing this and getting it through the administration so it was published. But along the way with that, big part of that is politics. It's also figuring out what's acceptable, how you can do that in a way that isn't going to get your boss in trouble. It's hard to get Jerry Brown in trouble, but I mean, you still want to, you don't want to do anything wrong. But also, working with really interested stakeholders. Some of them are lobbyists, right? Some of them are the sort of policy advocacy groups, that Marc is part of, right? I mean, not Marc's in particular, but like there's. The California Labor Federation had a strong interest in this, and so we had to listen to them, and it was really useful that we listened to them because they had really great ideas. And so similarly, that's going to be my role in the Housing Commission. We have some policy things that we would like to see differently. There's some local funding sources for affordable housing that we would like to maybe up the amount of funding that we can generate out of them. So my job is to see what the rules are, identify where we think there's some movement on, do the politics, walk to the city council offices and get a sense from where the council members are, and be able to come up with solutions that are politically feasible, that are going to have public policy outcomes that are going to ultimately benefit the low-income people that our purpose is to serve.
Great. Let's go back and do what Rosa was reminding me to do, but I sort of switched the order on everybody. We'll start with you, Rosa, but it's a sort of a two-part question. One is in a way, obviously, that's helpful, or maybe I can say it as one, that's helpful to everybody in terms of their thinking about their own trajectory. What's the possibilities for all of you that come out of the combined experience of these four terrific people? So it's two-part in that sense.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So yeah, there's so many interconnections here on this panel. Sparks are flying. I'm getting, it's very exciting to hear about all of this work. And Camille's work is in the San Joaquin Valley. It's resonating with me, and I'm so glad that she's doing it. I grew up there. I came from a family. My dad is a Mexican immigrant. He came here when he was a teenager. Both of my parents were migrant farm workers. I grew up in Arvin, California, which is one of those teeny tiny towns there at the foothills, mostly farm laborers in that community. My parents, before all of these protections that are not enforced were enacted, were sprayed on, several times by crop dusters and all of these horrible things. So I grew up, with all of this at the forefront of my consciousness, also immigration, because it so impacted everybody in my community. And it was very sort of critical for me. I wanted to very much engage and engage in work that spoke to that sort of the social justice. Social justice, it was at my core. Law school wasn't really a part of my plan. I didn't really, I guess, have a plan. I didn't know specifically how I was going to do all of this. But so after I graduated from, I went to Berkeley for undergrad, I sort of floundered a bit. I worked for 4 years before I went to law school because I didn't know I was going to law school at the time. I worked with primarily undocumented workers that had been injured on the job doing vocational rehabilitation, which is a program that no longer exists. But at the time, if you had incurred a permanent injury as part of your work, even if you were undocumented, you could get $15,000 by the state, from the state, to get retrained to do something else or to even start your own business. So I was primarily consulting with undocumented, monolingual Spanish-speaking workers and helping them figure out sort of what their next step was going to be. And in the course of doing this, I became more interested in the law and how I could sort of advocate for these same people within the context of the law. Again, I wasn't really sure how I was going to do it, and I frankly never saw myself as a lawyer. I didn't have really any examples in my life, in my family. I actually thought, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just go work for a law firm for a little while as like a paralegal. So I started going to community college at night and taking classes to become a paralegal. Really, again, most of my life has been this, it's not a clear plan, but things sort of fall into place. I met a lawyer along the way who said, "What are you doing? Go to law school." So I did. And while at law school, after my 1L year, I was at Boston College, so all the way over there on the East Coast. And I knew that I wanted to come back to the Bay Area. After I came to undergraduate school here, I said, I'm never leaving. I love it. I love my family. They're all still in Bakersfield, and they're dealing with the challenges of pollution and all of these things that Camille was talking about. And I go back regularly, but I do love living in the Bay Area, I have to say. So I came back after my 1L year and worked at EBCLC. So I was a law student there. And that's how I first got introduced to the work that they're doing. And I was in the immigration practice, and I absolutely loved it. I became a huge fan. And but then after my second year, I decided, okay, I have a huge amount of debt, absolutely no hope to figure out how the heck I was going to pay this off. So, I've heard about this a lot, and some might say I crossed over to the dark side, but I went and did civil litigation at a law firm in San Francisco for a couple of years. I did that after my 2L year and then after graduation, paid down some of my debt. But all the while, I stayed in touch with the people that I'd worked with at EBCLC, in particular, like my mentor and former supervisor there, Linda Tam. And I would just call and check in ever so often with her, not to ask about, opportunities or anything in particular, just to check in and see how she was doing, how my former clients were doing. And one day I did ask her, I said, I'm getting absolutely, I feel like this is sort of sucking my soul out. I want to be able to go back to doing the work I was doing before, to find out if she had any ideas, opportunities. And lo and behold, there was this opening for a lawyer to do the school-based work. And I was like, how the heck am I going to be able to do that? But I just feel incredibly lucky. It worked out, and I think it all boils down to maintaining those connections. And all the while, too, while I was at the firm doing litigation, I did a ton of pro bono work. And I think that's absolutely key, is staying connected and doing that work, no matter what path you end up taking. There are so many ways that you can give back to your community in whatever capacity whatever path you've chosen as a lawyer. So again, I feel incredibly fortunate, but my life has been a series of, things just fall into place. That's how it feels anyway. Maybe it's more planned than I think.
Well, it's a great story, but I think there's also a lot in there that's great advice for people. So we'll just do the alphabetical again.
Oh, okay. All right, so I grew up in Richmond, California. So for those of you from the Bay Area, that's the equivalent of East Palo Alto. And I loved it, and it was awesome. And I got to middle school and realized I couldn't become college eligible if I stayed in my school district. And I couldn't afford, they just didn't offer the classes. So at the time, 50% of California high schools did not offer graduation requirements that even met the basic requirements to go to Cal State. That percentage is higher now. I have a funny story about that if anyone wants to talk about that later. So I transferred districts because I couldn't afford the bus fare, and I worked when I was in high school because I came from a family that did not have a lot of stability at the time. My parents are immigrants. I have a weird class background because they sponsored a lot of their family to come over, but were also professionals. So on one hand, they had a very significant class privilege in their education, but they also didn't have money when I was growing up, so I didn't really identify with that. But I think the major place where the class privilege comes in is that was why I thought I could even go to college, was because I had parents who had gotten to college. So I transferred districts, and then to Moraga, which is the equivalent of transferring to Palo Alto. So for anyone who knows about Palo Alto High and everything like that, that was basically where I went for high school, was the equivalent in a smaller community, very affluent. So I went from a community where the average household income is about $30,000, between $25,000 and $30,000 for a family of four, to a community where it was $122,000, and it was weird. It was by far the biggest culture shock I've ever had, and you'll hear why that's funny in a moment, because then I went and worked abroad in a rural area, so that was more normal than moving to Moraga. So I went to school there. They started kicking kids out who were not from the district, or who didn't live in the district site borders, I guess, which is common. So my parents sold their house, which they had worked their entire life to buy, and rented so that my siblings and I could go to school in that district. I learned that the world was different, and that different people had very different life experiences than I did, and very different assumptions about how the world worked. And I would say that I think that move was my politicization. So by the time I went to UC Berkeley for undergraduate, apologies Stanford, because I bleed blue and gold. So I went to UC Berkeley. It was amazing. I went in large part because I could afford it, and I worked my way through college. I paid 2/3 of my cost of attendance out of pocket. I wanted to work on poverty and race. I was like, why are communities like the one I live in, why is it okay for them to be poor? Why is it okay for them to have shortened life outcomes? Why is it okay for there to be gang violence? But just across the 15 miles down the road, there's this idyllic community with lots of green space that's gorgeous, and everyone has every opportunity in the world and takes it for granted. So I went to college, and I focused on the school-to-prison pipeline. And I did that for about 3 years, and I was like, I just feel like I thought that education will set you free, and then I just decided that was not the case. If you couldn't eat food or have a place to live or have basic access to the things that keep you alive. So I studied political economy, and I went abroad to Kenya, not as weird as living in Moraga. And I lived in rural Kenya to see if international development was neo-colonial. It was. And I was, it was interesting. It was good. I'm glad I went. And then I came back because I was medically evacuated, and I needed health care. And at the time, we did not have Obamacare. I was also overaged to be covered under my parents. So I was like, I'm totally screwed. I have this persistent health issue, which I was evacuated for, and I have no health insurance. So, because I lost my job, of course, obviously. So I took a fellowship at Yale Law School, which I will tell you is the last thing I thought I would ever do, working for John Donahue, who is a professor here at Stanford. He had just moved to Yale, now he's back. And I spent a year with John Donahue crunching numbers as an econometrician, which is a fancy way of saying statistics and economics. And we wrote the Connecticut death penalty report, which resulted in the repeal of the death penalty in Connecticut. And he was awesome, and I loved it. And I was super bored during the days because being a research monkey was not really where my heart was. I'd been community organizing throughout college. I had briefly worked as a community organizer between medical evacuation and getting health insurance at Yale. So I started volunteering at the Community Economic Development Clinic at Yale's Law School Clinic, and they're independently funded, and so they do crazy things, and it was awesome. And I was like, wow, I never thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but maybe now I do. Not for the sake of being a lawyer, but for being, I believe that all our institutions are written into law. And so I thought lawyers are really good translators of where power is and how to change it. And I thought that would be really fun, is to do this kind of, I'm nerdy, I like finding loopholes, I like using systems against themselves, so this seems like a really good fit for me. And it was, so I went to Bolt, so repeat offender of UC Berkeley, and I loved it, and I had a great time, and it was scrappy, and they don't have a public interest program it's much more supportive now than it was when I was there, but there were 20 friends I had, and we were in it till the death, and that was kind of how I ended up here. But my mentor was from the Valley and said, if you really care about poor people, don't work in Richmond, go work in the Valley. And I was like, well, I don't know if you've been to Richmond. So, I was just like, that's whack. And then I went, and she was right. And she was totally right. So I spent 2.5 years working in the San Joaquin Valley before I applied for and received my Equal Justice Works Fellowship. And I work and live there today. And my takeaway to everyone is be a country lawyer. All the news you hear about the law school bubble, about there not being enough lawyers, it's a total load of crap. It is, because if you look at how many Americans are like in desperate need of civil legal services, it's enormous. And I get that Gideon is significant, and I love it, and I think it's important, right? Deprivation of your life and your liberty is huge. But civil law can mess your life up in a really big way, and it can make your life horrendous. And you can also be detained. You just don't get any rights when it happens. So, I think it's really significant for lawyers to look at alternative ways of going out. And I actually think that if you are in California, you should think about the California Apprentice Program, which lets you become a lawyer without going to law school. So if you have friends contemplating, public interest careers, and you're worried about law school debt, do the apprentice program, get paid for 5 years, take the bar, and be a fully accredited attorney just like everyone else. So that's my advice.
Fantastic. I don't want to be rude to my friends here, but I'm getting the high sign here for questions.
Sorry.
No, those were two great. Just a quickie on both of you so that we complete the sense, but particularly the lessons from the last part of what our two friends said.
So I had some take-home points that I'll just sort of share with people, right? I mean, one, so I went to NYU Law School, decided with the intent to go, to be more involved in politics. That was why I went. Mm-hmm. But I quickly decided, I was, in the first year there, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to actually go work for a firm for a little while. So then my strategy was, but at some point I was going to leave and do politics. So, and that's going to be the true for a lot of these people in this room, right? Especially the Stanford people, right? Let's be, you guys are going to have some opportunities that are easy, right? And also true for everyone else who just, they've got the grades, they're in law review, they know they're going to get one of those big firm jobs. So then focus in law school on what you're going to do after that firm job. So your internship should be political. They should be with the community organizations you want to work with. They should be don't spend a lot of time. Your clinic should be related to that. Don't spend a lot of time on corporate litigation classes, because you're gonna get hired anyway, and you're gonna be fine for a couple of years as a young attorney at one of those firms. Do the work that you need to do for that job afterwards. The other thing is I had all the privileges one could imagine. Middle class upbringing, NYU Law, worked at DLA Piper for 3 years, and at the end of that period, I still didn't have an in with a real cool political job. It wasn't possible. Like, there just wasn't. No one was going to hire me to do the kind of work that I ended up getting to do. So I worked for a campaign, and for Jerry Brown's campaign, and the result of that was that I got appointed to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And I think oftentimes we as lawyers and as law students think, if we're really smart and we're really hardworking and we're really brainy, then people will recognize that and elevate us to do the kind of work that we want to do that is really important to us. And that's great, but you recognize that oftentimes that's not what it takes. You're going to have to go get your hands dirty in politics and develop the kind of relationships that you need to get into that. And I think that's what it required for me. And I think if you look at a lot of other people's careers who have those sort of jobs in public policy that you're interested in, they did the same thing too. So I just want to make sure that people.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Colin. Marc, if you read carefully, has 2 master's degrees, which some of you may be saying, "Wow, didn't he do the right thing?" But anyway.
So, as Mr. Edelman said, I don't have a law degree. But I think that there are a few lessons from my experience that I can share with you, and I work with a ton of lawyers. There are several lawyers at my organization, and so we trade stories all the time. And not to disparage the profession at all, but we call them recovering attorneys. And so there are a lot of folks who have sort of had this evolution, if you will, within their career that has led them through legal service, now into this policy advocacy work, et cetera. And so I think the biggest things that I can just take from their stories as well as mine are to encourage you to be courageous, right? So as you think about your career, as you think about what you want to do with your life and what your legacy is, don't fall into the trap of sort of working within a mold because you feel like that's what you have to do. You've done law school, you've done law review, now you have to work for a Fortune 500 company or some big firm. That's not necessarily true. Follow your heart and be courageous.
Well, that's a great place to Time for a few questions. You know the drill from before. Come down to the microphones. Here comes somebody. That's good. Here comes somebody else. Love it. They're lining up on this side. You got a little duty over there. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Keith. I'm a 3L at Drexel Law. Rosa Bay, I think you indicated that your organization doesn't take federal funds because you wouldn't be able to do the work with their limitations. So I'm wondering, with all your organizations, what is the availability of federal and state funds to do the work you do? And what are the limitations the government places on what you can do if you accept the funds? Thank you.
Rosa, I think it was for you.
Well, I'm actually not sure. So, I mean, again, we don't accept any source of funds that would restrict our ability to serve, in particular, undocumented immigrants, because that's, a huge number of our clients. I'm not aware of any other restrictions that we have based on funding. But you have to be low income.
But I think the question was, if you don't take it's LSC, Legal Services Corporation money, what do you do? Were you going to speak about that?
I could say a little bit from a policy advocacy organization perspective. I think for us, receiving federal or any type of government funding tends to come with strings attached, and it limits the opportunities that you can take advantage of, right? So you can't necessarily advocate or do certain things with government money in the same way that you could with private or foundation dollars.
I mean, those of you who don't know, specifically the Legal Services Corporation, particularly since 1995, has a long list of restrictions of cases that you can't take. I assume most of you know that. You not only can't do class actions and represent immigrants and represent inmates and so on and so forth, but you can't, the restrictions even apply to money that you raise that's not the LSC money. So it's very constricting. In big cities, what people have done, and actually it wasn't, Rosa, what your organization did, but it's the fact of it. In big cities, there are enough organizations that don't take LSC money so that they're able to do the kind of structural and impact work. Otherwise, you're talking about very specific kinds of things. Foundations say they don't give general support, or other kinds of federal money that you have to apply for that has various kinds of things with that particular money. So that's a very short answer to your question. And the beyond the specifics, if you're a fairly substantial organization, it's like campaigning for office. Every day that you're in Congress or the Senate, you're making those phone calls. Well, in their own way, so are these organizations. I mean, it's putting together a $2 million or $3 million or a $4 million budget, you've got to have a lot of sources. It's really hard work.
I think she.
Oh, you're next. Okay. Sorry.
My name is Dana Ponnell, and I'm a 2L with Chicago Kent. And I actually had a question for Mr. Parent about the transition into a public policy role. You said you worked for a campaign, and I was wondering if that was paid employment, and if so, in what sort of capacity?
Yeah, so in my situation, it was not paid. I think there was only like 50 people on the entire Jerry Brown campaign, and maybe less than 10 of them were paid. I got a win bonus at the end that was like $1,000 after, right? So, and so that's unusual. Usually these things are paid, but they're not paid, enough, right? Even if they're paid a little bit, it's very small. But for those of you who are going to follow a model like mine, like go work for the private sector for a while, save some money so you can live and do on this, right? So I mean, the people who work on presidential campaigns, right? They don't get paid enough either, and oftentimes that's why the people who get to do that are people from privilege. Their parents take care of them, right? I wanted to go work on a campaign in 2004 after I graduated from college, but I didn't have the means to pay for that, so I stayed local and worked on some little campaigns, which also didn't pay enough, right? So it's just one of those. It's one of those things that it's not fair, and so if you want to do it, you have to find the resources in order to do that. And I think that's the other big piece of this is that it's if you really want to do it, you have to be willing to take that hit and also to do like work that's that you may think is beneath your intellect and your training and all that. Like I organized rallies and I wrote TV, or not TV, but I mean like web video stuff, and did a bunch of like I licked envelopes and stuff, right? As someone who just came from a giant corporate law firm, with billion-dollar cases. So but that's what it takes in order to get that. And I think people should start thinking about that soon to sort of structure their career path.
Okay, we're going to take these last two, I think, and then we're going to have lunch.
I'm too short. I'm Adelina Acuna. I'm a recent graduate from Stanford here and a young public interest lawyer. I'm so glad, Professor Edelman, that you brought up the issue of just the shrinking job market for young lawyers, though at the risk of contradicting what Camille said. And kind of the role that law schools play in sort of funneling students towards those jobs. I think it's very difficult to be a public interest student right now, in part because of a shortage of really great public interest work, especially for people who are just unable to find firm jobs or unwilling to take firm jobs. But I think a lot of times part of those limits come from our definitions of what a lawyer is and what jobs are appropriate for lawyers, what jobs require your law degree versus don't. And I'm really excited to see that a lot of you have thought outside the box and are really pushing those definitions, but unfortunately some of those definitions still really restrict what students can do. Loan forgiveness is predicated on definitions of what lawyering is, a lot of scholarships, that sort of thing. They really let you get on your feet, when you're carrying $160,000, $200,000 of debt. And I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about, especially as people in the early, first 10 years of your career, reaching back to the institution, to law school, either as mentors, as alums, to try and help change what I think is a really dynamic and right now very critical definition of what it means to be a lawyer.
That's a great question. Any of you taken that on in terms of reaching back to your law school you went to? Right?
Or the legal academy generally, just being part of that conversation.
But just to change the culture, change the financing mechanisms, all of those kinds of things. I think it would be a great charge for I'd love to see some of our alumni get more involved in that.
So I was the vice president of our law school when I was a student, which meant that I was in charge of staffing all our policy for the internal campus committees. As an alumna, what I've mostly been doing is actually helping build that public interest infrastructure that it doesn't have. So I've done really boring things like databasing, emailing alumni who don't know me, just finding where these people are. But what we've started to do is advocate pretty significantly on need-based grants and on LRAP, our loan repayment program. So Bolt recently is doing a pilot that funds people working at labor unions, which didn't used to get funded. C4s now qualify, whereas 501c3s were the only ones. Policy advocacy now qualifies. Your job only has to be 50% legal, and it doesn't have to be full-time is the other thing. I mean, they won't pay fully if you're not full-time, but they'll pay halfway if you're half-time. And we just started low bono, so private public interest firms. So it's a pilot project, but what I've been doing on the alumni side, honestly, is writing a ton of letters to the dean with like 70 signatures on it, and then tying that to funding. So like we're giving too, but we're giving strategically and only to specific funds, and we're making it very clear to the dean that we don't think the financial aid funding as it stands is appropriate or significant or enough. I hear you. I'm one of those grads with like $190,000 worth of debt. I think I was the first Bolt grad to cross 150. And it's just not sustainable when you're, it's not sustainable without outside support. So
to just one piece of that. So I got my funding from NYU while I worked in the Brown administration because I was, unfortunately far below the income threshold. NYU actually provides already for all of those circumstances and more. So take a look at other models and use that as part of your advocacy. But then the other thing is just throwing more money at the problem is good because it's that has to happen. But also law school needs to be less expensive to people, and we should all be advocates for that. And it's impactful not just for the people who are in public interest. It also forces people into the private sector and we just we should all be advocates on that, especially. Especially some of the faculty people who are, frankly, they're driving some of that, right? So so we just got to be. I think that's a huge problem for all of us, and we should be aware of that.
I'm very glad you brought that up. I also would some of you will know more about this in terms of the details than I do, but the federal financing, insofar as you have federal loans, is now down, for example, Camille, the kind of job that you have, I don't specifically know as much as I should about the boundaries you're talking about, but now your federal loan, 7% of your income, 10 years, you're done.
Yeah.
So that's those of you who don't know.
As long as I don't make too much money.
Yeah.
That's the tough part is if I actually do stay in my job for 7 years, if I paid on what the federal government wanted me to do, which was income-based repayment, there's no way I could have afforded it. I mean, right now my loan payments are more than what I make in a month. So without both subsidization, and
you're saying the federal isn't enough by itself.
It's absolutely not enough. I mean, with negative amortization, by the time you make enough money to begin to actually put money against your loans, instead of being on survival, I would owe over $600,000 at year 5 being out, and that's insane.
Yeah.
Just on interest alone. I also think it's crazy that they don't dismiss it in bankruptcy. It's the only loan you can't get rid of in bankruptcy.
Okay, last question. Thank you for that question.
I guess I'm Robert Strobel. I'm a 1L at Rutgers School of Law in Newark, and I hesitate to ask this because it already come up. But specifically about that topic, like what specific policy initiatives are state governments or the federal government considering? Because we can say all day that we want law schools to lower their tuition, but we'd also have to recognize that would be the unprecedented in history that universities would ever, lower their tuition by any substantial extent. And on the other side of the equation, like what you were talking about earlier, that there's the whole theme of everything I've heard this whole weekend is that there's just no money for people who want to represent those without money. So what policy initiatives, I know like the ABA, some of the divisions within it, like the GP solo practice, they want a rural lawyers network, but they're like looking at AmeriCorps and whatnot, but they're also solo practice attorneys who are in the same boat, who don't have the resources to do it. So I feel like government has to do something, so.
Government should do something. I don't know.
It's not likely in this political climate.
No, that's true. But we should start having those conversations. We should start doing the thinking. This is an issue for us on the left, right? We say, things should be better for this group of people, and so let's find some more money to do that, right? That's okay. So we all agree that that's a good thing. But there's also some of the things. Maybe we can make some of the things that we're doing for people less expensive. Right? We did this in affordable. This is a huge thing in affordable housing, right? So we have finite resources. We one thing is to spend more money on affordable housing. The other way is to make the construction of affordable housing less expensive. Require less parking requirements or or other things. And so we should be thinking, what are the appropriate mechanisms that government can say to universities and law schools, saying that if you're going to receive federal dollars, or then these are the things that you need to do to constrain costs. I don't have an answer for all of those things, but we should be willing to engage in those conversations, and we shouldn't be shy about them. We shouldn't be afraid to say that there are some things that, there are some cost drivers in government and also in the academy and in affordable housing that we wouldn't be willing to see reined in.
I would also like to say that we should do a lot more within the legal profession. So right now, public interest lawyers, there's not enough of them. They're doing too much. Same with public defenders, and they're also doing all that pro bono that private sector attorneys are ethically required to do and don't do. Right? So my kind of perspective on it, I've worked with amazing pro bono attorneys. I love them. I wish everyone worked as much as they did in the sector. I'm like, pay me then. That's what Equal Justice Works is, right? Like, I have 2 corporate sponsors who are essentially paying me to outsource part of their public interest in pro bono work, and I don't think that's great. I think there's a lot of funding issues around that, but in general, one of the things I love about Equal Justice Works that's a little different is they're committed to increasing the number of fellowships every year, whereas other fellowship programs cap their fellowships to keep them prestigious and elite. And I also think that, I think advocating in your state bar to bring back the apprentice program in the nation in general, the last Supreme Court justice who was an apprentice was William O. Douglas. It was common practice in Midwestern states because there weren't enough lawyers. So I think getting your state to say that you can do something besides law school and coming up with some really good parameters is one way. You can advocate at your local level. I think we should be advocating nationally. I think we should be putting a lot more onus on really rich lawyers who do have these massive jobs to give more generously and thoughtfully. Even at Bolt, when I was there, this statistic remains true. Low-income people give the most as a percentage of their income and in total. And I feel like we're always chasing high-income earners. I think I'm a big believer in shaming. I am. And it's like, if poor people can give 30% of their income to charity, why can you not give 5 hours of your work? And similarly, law didn't used to be about big law firms, this is very much, I think, fueled by law schools in so many ways, because big law firms that used to, being a lawyer used to mean something more than your $250,000 starting salary and bonus. It used to mean something about the role that you played in civil society and the role you played as an officer of a court and an officer of justice. And we don't have any justice in law schools as far as I can tell. And we certainly don't have justice in our profession. And I think one of the things that's exciting about the ABA is that they are a little bit more, they're way more progressive than my classmates were. And my classmates believed that they were quite progressive, but law is very conflict and risk averse. Or it's conflict friendly when it's litigation, but otherwise not at all friendly. And I think some of it is going out on your own, putting out your own shingle, doing things in a different way, not following the dominant model. I think there's a lot of cool things that lawyers could do if we weren't stuck in the framework that law school gives us, which is also designed to terrify us into thinking that you cannot live on a legal aid salary. My salary is not huge. I live extraordinarily comfortable for a rural community. And on top of it, it's just insane to me. I'm like, only 27% of this country has a college degree. Very few people have a law degree. If I make $50,000 as my starting income, people tell me I'm impoverished, and that's so much higher than 70% of the nation. Just even how we think about these things has to fundamentally change. So I think there's a lot we can do. And I feel for folks who are here. I was in law school when the economic system tanked, and it's much worse now. So, get creative, find your partners in crime, excuse my language, and hustle. I think we need to be okay with really hustling and challenging authority.
Well, that's a place to say thank you to this great panel.